Here I'll show you how to use VBA and macros to prompt a user to select a file from the computer using the lovely intuitive window that you see right here. It's really nice. It's the familiar file selection dialog window. So the user can browse all the folders and directories of the computer, select the desired file, hit open, and then you can do whatever you want with that file in the macros in VBA. You can open it, get data from it, close it, whatever you need to do, you can then do. I'll also show you how to apply filters to the files the user sees here so they can only select the file type you'd like them to select. And this tutorial is a small part of a much larger course that I'm building for teachexcel.com on VBA and macros, so definitely check that out. And one other cool thing I'll show you how to do is if the user doesn't select a file here, let's say they hit cancel, you get a little window, no file selected. So let me show you how to do all of that now. Before we start, check the video description and click the link to Teach Excel so you can download the files for the tutorial and follow along. And make sure to subscribe and accept notifications so you can see all the new tutorials. Alright, so make sure to download the workbook so you can follow along. Hit Alt F11 to go to the VBA window, open up Module 1, and you're going to get right here. So as I mentioned, this is part of a much larger course for VBA and macros on teachexcel.com. And what I've done here is to take approximately half of one of the tutorials that I've done for that course, and I'm going to go through it and show you how everything works. You'll notice when you go down here, there are many comments. And that's one of the benefits of the course. I'm not just going to give you a few lines of code and a few comments and expect you to remember every single thing. Here I even include a little reference section for the filters, which can be kind of complicated. So there are many comments. So if you download the workbook, don't freak out. Everything is here to help you. So what I'm going to do now is to delete all of this, and we're just going to write out the code, and the comments will be there in the file when you download it. Alright, so for the first one, I want to show you the simplest, easiest way to show people the little window that I just showed you, the pop-up window where they can select a file. As all things with code, there's a simple way to do it and there's a useful way. Let's go with the simple one for now, just that little window. If you just want to get the little window, it is as easy as application.get open file name. You'll see it right there. Hit tab to fill it in. This right here actually shows you the window. If I stay right here and I hit play, we're going to get the little window you saw. Now you have the window. But nothing's going to happen. So I select Bob, then I hit open. Okay, nothing happens. Let's make it useful now. And in the next macro, I'm going to show you two macros in this tutorial. I'm going to make everything a little bit more standardized, so we're going to declare variables and do things like that. Here, let's keep it simple. What we want to do is make a little variable, user selected, let's call it file, and you want to set it equal to this. And if you downloaded the file, you'll see a bunch of comments over here that kind of explain what's going on here. So this shows the little window, but it also returns a result from that window. So if you want to capture the result from the window, you just make a little variable here, then an equal sign, and then this right here. That concept can be kind of confusing if you're not used to it. This shows me the window and it gives me the result of the window, but that's how it works here. So the next thing is to do something with that result. And this is kind of a little interesting. We're going to use an if statement. This right here, user selected file. It will either return false or the full file name path and extension of the selected file. Okay, so for the first thing, let's say if it equals false. False means the user canceled it, they hit the little X, or just escape. So if user selected file equals false, then, and let's go down here and make our else. In the course, you will note that I like to build my if statements kind of like this to have the framework of it, and then add the data. Alright, so now we're going to create the little message box I showed you at the end of the intro, which tells the user no file selected. Okay, so that tells them, hey, you didn't select a file, so nothing is going to happen. You can put whatever you want here. You don't even have to have this section though, but it's a nice simple little section. So if you wanted to not include this section, you could just put a little not in front of this, It's an awesome little feature that turns false to true and true to false. And then down here would be if the user selected the file. There are many ways to do that, but putting not in front of this is a very simple one. Anyway, we are going to leave the message box there so the user knows something's going on. It's a good idea to tell them what's up. And now we can do whatever we want. So down here, user selected a file. Yay! Do something. Well, the first thing I want to do is to show you what it looks like. So let's put it in a message box. All right, message box. Let's say file selected, :space, close quote. We're going to use the ampersand to attach something to the end of it. And let's output user selected file. This way you can see exactly what the macro sees, exactly what it gets back from this window. So let's stay in here and hit play or F5. All right, we have the window. Navigate to the file. Let's open up Bob or click Bob, then hit open. And here we go, file selected, and this is what it gets back. It gets the full file path, location, name of the file, and file extension. See testbob.xlsm. So that is what you get in your macro. When the user clicks the open button, it doesn't automatically open the file. It gives you, the person who's building the macro, this. So now we can do something with it. Now, of course, since you have the full file path, you can simply do workbooks.open and user selected file and open up the file immediately. So if we go now to run this, and let's open up link 1. I think I have some data in there, and hit open. File selected, see test link1.xlsx. OK. And there we go. This file has links in it, so it's going to ask me if I want to update the link. Sure, go ahead and update the link. And here we have the new workbook. Yay! So you can do whatever you want with it. You could get data from it using the macro, then close it. The user doesn't even have to know that a workbook was opened. They could just know that they selected a workbook, and now the code is doing something with it. So let us go ahead and close this. Don't save. And that's all you have to do for the basic window, this right here. And one little thing here, if you want to work with this workbook after it's open, it's a good idea to assign a variable to it. So since it is an object, a workbook object, we have to type set. So let's say workbook new equals, and when we are putting this, the result of this inside of another variable, we need to get the method and put the arguments inside of parentheses, like that. Now we can work with the opened workbook like this. This thing that I just showed you right here might not be in the downloadable file because I don't talk about that in this part of the online course, because the tutorials that come just before this deal a bunch with setting variables to workbooks, opening them, doing things with them, and closing them. So I just wanted to note that here we're not going to talk too much about that because the course goes on and on about a million different ways to do that and all of the useful things you can do with it. Here we now have a lovely window that's going to open. It looks nice. The user is familiar with it. They understand what to do. We have a message box if they don't select the file, and we have a message box if they do select it. You probably won't have that there, but now you can open the workbook and do whatever you need to it. So that's the framework. That's the basic deal. But there are a number of other things you could do. You could add filters to it. We're going to cover that in the very next macro. You could also select multiple files. Multiple files requires actually dealing with an array down here, so this part of it works a little bit different and is oddly more complex than you might expect. That's covered in the premium course version of this tutorial. I'm not going to cover it here. And also in the premium course, I show you how to choose where to save the file and under what name. But for this tutorial, let's go down to filters. And you want to have a filter because, let me just go back here real quick and let's run this. If I allow the user to select any file, which is what it is by default, they could go down here and select a text file. Maybe you don't want them to select a text file. Maybe you only want them to select macro-enabled files or XLSX files. So You want to make it so the user can't see these files that they shouldn't be selecting. That's very important. And that's what I'm going to show you in the next step. Now I'm going to hit escape. We should get our little message box that says no file selected. Perfect. No file selected. I like that little part. Okay, let's go to user selected file open filters. You would think I wouldn't need so many notes to tell you how to use the filter, right? But I wanted to include this as kind of a reference card because to apply filters you have to learn a slightly different syntax, maybe an entirely different syntax, but it's almost like a little different language. And to apply the filters, you actually are going to write out something like this. Part of it the user sees, part of it the user does not see. Also in this section we're going to add a title and select which filter should be shown by default. Those are very easy to do. Now you see this filter section here, it's very big and it's very comprehensive. Basically it's going to explain everything that I'm going to explain here now, but you can use it as a reference. So I'm not right now going to go through every single little section right here. It's just going to explain everything in depth so that you don't always have to come back to this tutorial. All right, and I have a few different examples right here, very helpful. I like to show the examples because oftentimes when I'm learning something, it seems like people only show you one default little thing and not helpful variations. So let us go all the way down here. And yes, this is everything with all of the notes in it. Very, very helpful. So let us close or delete all of this and begin. First things first, when I get to this point in the course, I start to make things a bit more formal. I don't start you guys off with everything too formal because I think that that's just, well, I think it's terrifically unhelpful. So right now in this course, we start to make things more formal. We're going to be declaring variables. So declaring variables, let's say user selected file as variant. Declaring variables is never required. But it does help you to better structure your macros when they get larger, and it makes inputting the code and the variable names a little bit easier and allows you to use something called option explicit, which I'm not going to talk about here. That requires you to declare all of your variables. So I'm going to write out the variables here, and then I will explain them. Window title is string. Let's see, file filter as string. And file filter index as integer. Okay, so as I said a moment ago, we are going to be adding a window title. So I've got a variable that's going to hold that title. It's declared as a string variable because it's going to hold text. String variables hold text. File filter, it's what's going to create the filter the user uses to see certain types of files. That is going to be saved as a string as well, and then file filter index, which I'll explain momentarily, but it basically determines which file filter to show by default. That's just a number, so we store it as an integer. What is interesting, and I kind of mentioned this in the previous macro, is user selected file. That one is a variant. So notice that we didn't declare user selected file in the last macro. You don't have to. I'm just making things a little bit more formal here. But since this variable can hold either false, which is a Boolean value, which means a true or a false value, or a text value, we must declare this variable as a variant because its value type can vary. Now in the VBA course on teachexcel.com, I have an entire section devoted to variables. So I explain a lot more there. I don't want to explain too much here because, like I said, this is optional, but it's a good idea when things get more complex. So now we have the 4 variables that we're going to be using, and obviously you need to have an idea of what you're going to do in your macro before you declare variables. And yes, you can go ahead and declare more when you get into the middle of your macro and realize that you need more variables. Now let's get the easy thing out of the way, and let's make a window title. Window title equals, let's call it, instead of the default open, choose a file to open. That's going to appear in this section of the little tiny window for file selection. So that's an easy part. Now let us get to the filter. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a file filter and then explain it for you. So as I mentioned, file filters are stored as text. I'm going to go ahead and give me some space right here so we can get this in the middle of the screen. Here we go. And now let's create a file filter. Let's say that we want to create one to show only text files. So text files .txt, comma, .txt. That is a file filter right there. That is the format of it right here. It has two parts. Yes, it looks confusing, but it's really not too difficult. It has two parts right here. This is what the user sees. And right here, this is what the user does not see, but it controls the files that you will be able to see. So it uses the file extension to say, hey, I only want to see files that end with .txt. So it has two parts. This is the second part. This right here is the first part. And in the little notes section up here, I use this as an example, text files, part 1, part 2, and a little description for each one, part 1, part 2. And some examples of part 1 right there, as you can see. Now, if you're not sure what the file extension, the end of the file, is for the file type that you would like, when you're browsing your files in Windows, at least Windows 10, you can go to the View tab, and there should be a little option that says Show File Extensions. Check that, and you'll see a file extension for all the files on your computer when you're browsing through your computer. So that'll tell you which file extension you need to put right here. And the asterisk, that's very important. You put that in front of the file extension. So it says anything can come before this, but this must come at the end. And I'm going to show you some of the variations now. Let's say that you wanted to do this for Excel workbook files. Let's say Excel workbook. And the beauty of this is that once you get one of them down, you can just copy paste like I did and just change what you need to. So XLSX is the end, and XLSX is the end right there. And now I've created a file filter to show only Excel workbooks. Now what if I want to show text files or Excel workbooks? I want the user to choose. Well, what you can do, just take this out of here, go here, type a comma, I'll put a little space, and paste it in there. And when you see this the first time, that's when it looks really confusing because you think, okay, what the heck is going on? Text files, TXT, Excel workbook, XLSX, what's happening? It's because they go in pairs. For text files, part 1, part 2, and then you have the next one for the next file type, part 1, part 2, and if I put another comma here, it would go for the next file type after that. So that's why it's kind of confusing. It's not 1, 2, 3, 4, it's this all refers to one thing here, broken into two parts. This all refers to one thing here, broken into two parts. Now let's go finish the filter index and get a sample so we can see what it looks like in the window itself. File filter index equals, let's say, 2. Now what this means is which filter would you like to show by default? Well, I have two filters, this one and this one. So 1 refers to this one, 2 refers to this one. I want to show the Excel workbook filter by default, so the user sees Excel workbooks by default with XLSX as the file extension. So I put 2 for the file filter index. Now what we're going to do is just what we did in the previous macro. User selected file equals application.get open file name. This time we're going to add some arguments, and we want to put them within parentheses because we put this inside of a variable. So the first argument is file filter, so we just put file filter, comma, next one, filter index, file filter index, next one is title, window, title. And you can see multi-select right there. That's the guy that allows you to select multiple files, but then you also have to iterate through an array to do something with all of those files. It's kind of annoying that you have to learn another thing just to deal with this, especially after learning the file filter index, but such is life with VBA, and that's covered in the premium course tutorial. So Now we have our lovely little get open file name. And do whatever we want with it. We're not going to do anything with it right now. I just want to show you what the window looks like. So let us hit play and run this guy. First, notice that choose a file to open is now the title here. That's our window title. Down here for the filters, it is no longer all files. It is Excel Workbook. If I hit this, we see text files and Excel Workbook. The default option being Excel Workbook is the reason that now, even though we're in the same directory we were previously in, we only see .xlsx files. That's the file format for the newer versions of Excel 2007 and later. And if I go down here, I can select text files and see the text files. And that's how it works for the file filters. Now let's make it so we can see Excel Workbook and text files at the same time, because maybe you don't want them to have to switch between these. You just want to have multiple file extensions and you say, hey, select any one of these as long as it's one of these file types. So let us get out of this window, go back here, and now we will change our file filter. What I'm going to do is just copy and paste it down here. And let's say text or Excel files. And let us go ahead and delete this. And we will copy this. Okay. So now we just have one section. What you do here to have multiple types is you use a semicolon. So no comma, just a semicolon. So right here, semicolon, paste that in. Right here, semicolon, paste that in. So you see these formats are, well, I want to say similar but different. But it's very, very easy to confuse this. What I recommend doing is just having a version of each one of these in your code somewhere, maybe right next to each other like this. Put a little note about what each one does, and that way you're not going to get confused in the future when you think, hey, I just want to add a file extension. What the heck do? I haven't looked at macros for 6 months or a year. Because you're not just by default going to know what this semicolon guy means. So now let us run this again and see what we get. All right, everything looks good. We have a lot more files here. What do we see down here? Text or Excel files. It's the only option to choose. All right, and we see lots of text and Excel files here. Perfect. This makes life so much easier. And one of the things that you might want to do is you might want to go down here and put, maybe I'll make this a little third option. And we'll go here, comment that out, go to the end. You might want one, which is the default. All files, and all files is written like this. Where are you? Here, here, here. And then here, here, here. Just like that. So now if I run it, we'll have another option, all files. So even the macro-enabled workbooks are selectable here. But we still have text or Excel files if we want. And you may have noticed that here for the second one, we only had one option right here. File filter index did not cause a problem, even though it was still at 2. It just, if it's bigger than it needs to be, so there was only one option there and I put 2 for here, it'll just default to the first one, no problem. So file filters are very annoying, and the thing is you're not going to use them that often. You're going to use them once, you're going to build your window to select files, and then you're probably never going to come back to it. But it's very important to get right because, as I mentioned previously, if you allow the user to select a file type that you don't want to work with, it'll throw an error in the macro when you do something with the wrong file type. So it's very good to make sure you get that right. All right, and then all we have to do here is the same as in the last macro. Equals false. Then, and I'm just going to do this quickly, message box, no file selected, else, and if, do what you want here. And we'll put a little message box, file selected, and user selected file. And go down here and do that. So we now have a nice little working macro. Make sure everything's good. All files, let's go to text or Excel. Okay. How about test one copy? Hit open. And there we go, full file path. So this tutorial has taken a while. So you may think, hey, this is a really complex topic, opening the windows. It's not complex. This is all you have to do to get that little window to open right here. What takes so much time is everything else. And what's going to take you so much more time when you're actually building out your full macro is what you do down here to open the file, to get some data from it. Before that, to make sure it is even the correct file type, to save the files, to close it, to make sure that if you're going to overwrite data, you don't show the user an error. So you have to check if the file even exists there. If you're going to use save as, maybe you want to use save as copy. There are so many things you can do. But to actually just show the window, it's very easy. You just have to be careful if that's all you do. Sometimes I feel like 98% of coding is just preparing for the user to cause an error. But anyway, I will leave you with that. And if you have not already downloaded the sample file for this tutorial, go ahead and do that, because as I've mentioned about a million times, there are so many more comments in there that'll help you out. And that way you can use it as a nice reference when you're building your own macros. And if you like this tutorial, definitely check out the premium course on teachexcel.com for VBA and macros, where I talk about so many more things for building your macros and getting you comfortable with using VBA. I hope you liked the tutorial. If it was helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and make sure to subscribe and accept notifications so you can see all the new tutorials.